Washington Democrats made up their minds to impeach President Trump before he was even inaugurated.
Donald Trump is a living, breathing, impeachable offense.
Donald Trump is facing an impeachment trial again. No president has ever been impeached twice, and no president has ever gone on trial after leaving office. It's fair to say we're in pretty uncharted territory. So what's the case against him? Donald Trump is accused of inciting violence against the government, specifically this, the storming of Congress by thousands of his supporters. But his accusers say you have to go back a couple of months to last November's presidential election.
We know there was massive fraud.
That was a rigged election. If you count the legal votes, I easily win.
Trump lost, but refused to admit it. Not only that, but when the state of Georgia was getting ready to hold a second round of voting to settle two very close Senate races, Mr. Trump is accused of trying to intervene illegally.
I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
It all came to a head on January the 6th, when Congress was due to confirm the results of the presidential election.
All right, friends, welcome back to Jack Mockler Family. More than 100 members of Congress have now publicly declared that Trump cannot remain in office, calling for his immediate resignation. And if he refuses to go voluntarily, they are prepared to use every constitutional tool available to force him out. Let those numbers sink in for a moment. Over 120 House representatives and at least 7 United States senators have put their names on the line. They have gone public with a demand that has no modern precedent. They are saying that the man in the Oval Office is unfit to serve, that he is dangerous to the country, and that waiting until the next election is not an acceptable option. They want him gone now.
In a long, bitter speech, Mr. Trump railed against the entire election process.
We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Within minutes of him finishing, some of his supporters were breaking into the Capitol building. But did the president actually incite violence? America's First Amendment, which protects freedom of speech, gives Mr. Trump lots of leeway to say pretty much whatever he wants, short of ordering his supporters to storm the Capitol, which he did not do.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
It'll be up to the Senate's 100 members to decide if Mr. Trump is guilty or not. And the Democrats will need at least 17 Republicans to join them to get a conviction. It's a really tall order. Most Republicans think the trial shouldn't even be happening.
This proceeding we are about to enter is unconstitutional.
But what if it does go against him? Well, then Donald Trump will be the first president to be impeached and convicted. He'd almost certainly be barred from ever running for public office again, and he could lose his presidential pension and perks. But what if he wins? Democrats could still try and find some other way to punish the former president, but to survive impeachment twice in a year would, in the eyes of Mr. Trump's loyal base, represent another victory against an establishment that's just out to get him. A useful platform, perhaps.
Today, before he can do any more damage to the institutions that have held this democracy together for more than 2 centuries. This is not hyperbole. This is not me trying to scare you with dramatic language. This is actually happening on Capitol Hill as we speak. Lawmakers are walking onto the House floor and onto the Senate floor, and they are using words like threat and danger and constitutional crisis. They are laying out detailed legal arguments for why Trump's conduct rises to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors. And they are building a case that is more comprehensive than anything the country has ever seen against a sitting president. Let me tell you about the impeachment documents that have already been filed, because this is where the story gets truly staggering in its scope.
In the last half hour, the US Senate has found President Trump not guilty of abuse of power and the obstruction of Congress in his historic impeachment trial. Donald Trump had been charged with high crimes and misdemeanors by the members of the House of Representatives. But as expected, the Republican majority in the Senate cleared him, which means he will fight for re-election in November. Our North America editor John Sopel reports.
Senators, how say you? Is the respondent, Donald John Trump, guilty or not guilty?
A process that started last September came to an end today, with senators voting one by one on the 2 articles of impeachment.
Mr. Alexander, not guilty. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, guilty.
And then the verdict.
It is therefore ordered and adjudged that the said Donald John Trump be, and he is hereby, acquitted of the charges in said articles.
But the wall of Republican unity was broken by Mitt Romney. The former presidential candidate, with a bombshell speech, said he would vote to convict the president of abuse of office.
The grave question the Constitution tasks senators to answer is whether the president committed an act so extreme and egregious that it rises to the level of a high crime and misdemeanor.
There is a resolution, House Resolution 353, that contains not one, not two, but 7 separate articles of impeachment, 7 distinct categories of alleged misconduct, each one backed by detailed evidence and legal reasoning, each one representing a separate violation of the oath that Trump swore on Inauguration Day. The first article deals with obstruction of justice. This is the pattern we have seen throughout Trump's time in office. The efforts to interfere with investigations, to pressure prosecutors, to dangle pardons in front of potential witnesses, to use the power of the presidency to shield himself and his allies from accountability. The resolution documents specific instances where Trump allegedly crossed the line from aggressive defense of his administration into active obstruction of the legal process.
Yes, he did.
With the impeachment process now behind him, Donald Trump is seeing his approval ratings inching up. The Republican Party is standing right behind him, and the Democrats have had a shocking few days after the shambles of the Iowa caucus. It's all turning out to be a very good week for Donald Trump. And last night he delivered a highly partisan State of the Union address that could have been from a Republican rally. But the shadow of impeachment couldn't be missed, as Donald Trump pointedly snubbed the Democratic Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who'd led the moves to impeach the president. Her outstretched arm ignored. And the Speaker's disdain was etched on her face as the president made his remarks. And then, in an extraordinary act of defiance, or petulance, opinions divided, Nancy Pelosi ripped up her copy of his speech. In his speech, the president focused on the strength of the economy, something he hopes will be his trump card in this election year.
Jobs are booming, incomes are soaring, poverty is plummeting, crime is falling, confidence is surging, and our country is thriving and highly respected again.
But look at the faces of those listening, loving from one side, loathing from the other. A microcosm of America, a foretaste of how bitterly contested this election will be. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
This is the kind of conduct that brought down Richard Nixon, and Congress is now formally alleging that Trump did the same thing. The second article accuses Trump of usurping Congress's power over spending. The Constitution could not be clearer on this point. Congress controls the money. The power of the purse belongs to the legislative branch. But according to the impeachment resolution, Trump has been acting like that clause doesn't exist. He has frozen congressionally approved funds. He has refused to release money even after courts ordered him to. He has treated federal spending like a personal slush fund that he can turn on and off whenever it suits his political needs. That is a direct violation of the separation of powers, and it is listed as its own impeachable offense. The third article focuses on abuse of trade powers. Trump has been imposing tariffs and making unilateral trade decisions that many constitutional scholars say require congressional approval. He has used emergency declarations in ways that stretch the law past its breaking point. He has cost American consumers billions of dollars in higher prices while bypassing the legislative branch entirely. Trade policy was never meant to be dictated by executive order, but that is exactly what has been happening, and the impeachment resolution calls it out as an abuse of power that warrants removal from office. The fourth article is about First Amendment violations. This one should send chills down the spine of every American who believes in free speech. The resolution alleges that Trump has used the machinery of the federal government to punish people for exercising their constitutional right to criticize the government. Law firms that represented his political opponents have faced retaliation. Media organizations that ran unfavorable coverage have been threatened with regulatory action. Private citizens who spoke out against the president found themselves targeted by federal agencies. This is not how America is supposed to work. The First Amendment exists precisely to protect people from government retaliation when they voice dissent. And Congress is now alleging that Trump has systematically undermined that protection. The fifth article accuses Trump of creating unlawful offices within the government. This is a more technical charge, but it is no less serious. The Constitution gives Congress the authority to create and fund government agencies. The president cannot simply invent new positions and new bureaucratic structures on his own. But according to the resolution, Trump has been doing exactly that, setting up offices that answer only to him, appointing people to jobs that do not legally exist, and reorganizing the executive branch in ways that violate federal law. This is not just bureaucratic nitpicking. This is about whether the president has to follow the same rules as everyone else when it comes to how the government is structured. The sixth article deals with bribery and corruption. The founders specifically mentioned bribery in the Constitution as grounds for impeachment. They understood that the greatest threat to a republic was leaders who used public office for private gain. And the resolution alleges that Trump has done exactly that on a massive scale. Foreign governments booking rooms at Trump properties to win favor. Businesses seeking government contracts making payments that ended up in Trump's pocket. A systematic pattern of self-dealing where the presidency was turned into a profit center for the Trump family. That is corruption in its purest form, and Congress is now formally alleging that it happened. The seventh and final article is the broadest, and in many ways the most alarming. It accuses Trump of what the resolution calls tyranny, a systematic effort to destroy democratic institutions and concentrate power in his own hands. This ties together all of the other charges into a single narrative. The attacks on judges who ruled against him, the defiance of court orders, the threats against political opponents, the manipulation of the Justice Department, the efforts to turn the entire federal government into a weapon against anyone who dared to oppose him. The resolution argues that this is not just a collection of individual offenses. It is a coordinated campaign to undermine democratic governance itself. And that is tyranny. Exactly what the founders fought a revolution to escape. On top of all of this, there is another impeachment resolution filed by Representative Al Green, House Resolution 537, focused specifically on Trump's abuse of war powers. The Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the authority to declare war and authorize military force. But Trump has been acting like that provision doesn't exist. He has ordered military strikes without congressional approval. He has made decisions about war and peace that belong to the legislative branch. He has treated the military like his personal tool rather than a shared responsibility between the co-equal branches of government. And this resolution argues that, too, is an impeachable offense. So let's recap what we have sitting in Congress right now. 7 articles of impeachment in one resolution covering obstruction, spending violations, trade abuses, First Amendment violations, unlawful offices, bribery, and tyranny. Another resolution focused on war powers abuses. Over 120 House members and at least 7 senators publicly demanding that Trump resign or face removal. And open discussions among lawmakers about using the 25th Amendment as a backup option if impeachment proves too slow or too difficult. This is unprecedented. This is history happening in real time, and every single American needs to understand what is at stake. Let me take you deeper into what the 25th Amendment discussion actually means, because a lot of people don't fully understand this tool or how it could potentially be used against Trump. The 25th Amendment was ratified in 1967, long after the founders wrote the original Constitution, and it was designed primarily to deal with scenarios where a president becomes physically incapacitated. Think about Woodrow Wilson suffering a stroke while in office. Think about a president being shot or falling into a coma. The amendment creates a process for the vice president and the cabinet to step in and temporarily transfer power when the president cannot discharge their duties. But here is where things get legally creative and politically explosive. Some lawmakers are arguing that Trump's conduct is so erratic, so dangerous, and so fundamentally detached from constitutional governance that it qualifies as a form of incapacity. They are not saying he had a stroke. They are not saying he is medically unable to function. They are saying that his pattern of behavior, the defiance of court orders, the attacks on democratic institutions, the refusal to accept legal limits on his power, amounts to an inability to faithfully execute the office of the presidency. That interpretation pushes the 25th Amendment into territory it has never occupied before. The amendment has been invoked in the past for temporary transfers of power when presidents had medical procedures. Ronald Reagan used it when he had surgery. George W. Bush used it when he had colonoscopies. But it has never been used to remove a president based on allegations of misconduct or unfitness. The amendment was not designed for that purpose. Impeachment was. But the fact that sitting members of Congress are even talking about the 25th Amendment, that they are floating the idea in press conferences and on social media and in conversations with reporters, tells you how desperate the situation has become. These are not fringe figures. These are elected officials who understand the Constitution and understand the gravity of what they are suggesting. They are raising the 25th Amendment not because they think it is the best tool for the job, but because they are preparing for a scenario where impeachment might fail, or where events might move faster than the impeachment process can handle. Let me walk you through the political math that everyone in Washington is calculating right now. Even if the House of Representatives impeaches Trump, which is a real possibility given the number of lawmakers who have already gone public with their demands, the case would then move to the Senate for a trial. Conviction requires a 2/3 vote. That means at least 67 senators would need to vote against Trump. Right now, the Senate is controlled by Republicans who have shown little appetite for breaking with the president. Democrats control fewer than 50 seats. So even if every single Democrat votes to convict, which is not guaranteed, they would still need at least 17 Republicans to join them. 17 Republicans. That is a very tall order in today's political environment. Most Republican senators have spent years defending Trump against every accusation, every investigation, every impeachment attempt. They have voted to acquit him twice before. They have stood by him through scandals that would have destroyed any other politician. The idea that 17 of them would suddenly turn on him now, especially when the Republican base remains intensely loyal to Trump, seems unlikely to say the least. But here is what makes this moment different from the previous impeachments. The scope of the charges is so much broader this time. When Trump was impeached for the Ukraine phone call, the allegation was relatively specific. He pressured a foreign leader to investigate Joe Biden. When he was impeached for January 6th, the allegation was about inciting an insurrection. Both were serious charges, but they were focused on discrete events. This time, the impeachment resolution covers 7 separate categories of misconduct, spanning the entire length of Trump's time in office. It is a comprehensive indictment of his whole approach to governance. That breadth makes it harder for Republican senators to dismiss the impeachment as a partisan witch hunt. They cannot point to one incident and say this is overblown. They cannot argue that the charges are based on a single questionable phone call or a single speech. The resolution lays out a pattern of behavior that touches virtually every aspect of executive power: obstruction, spending, trade, free speech, government structure, corruption, tyranny. That is not one thing. That is everything. And then there is the War Powers Resolution on top of it all, adding another layer of constitutional violation to the pile. Trump ordering military action without congressional approval, treating war powers as his personal prerogative. Acting like the Commander-in-Chief clause gives him unlimited authority to send American troops into harm's way whenever he feels like it. That is the kind of overreach that alarms even some conservatives who otherwise support Trump's policies. The public pressure is also different this time. The previous impeachments happened while Trump was still in his first term, still building his legacy, still facing the possibility of re-election. Now he is deep into his second term. The fatigue factor is real. Even some supporters are tired of the constant chaos, the endless legal battles, the daily drama that seems to follow Trump everywhere. The calls for resignation coming from over 100 lawmakers tap into that fatigue. They give permission for people who are exhausted by the Trump era to say, enough is enough. The footage coming out of Capitol Hill is striking. Lawmakers standing at podiums with stern faces and measured voices. Press conferences where members of Congress lay out the constitutional case for removal. Viral clips spreading across social media of representatives and senators saying things that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. They are not mincing words. They are calling Trump a threat to democracy. They are saying his conduct is exactly what the founders warned about. They are demanding action now, not after the next election, not after the next crisis, but immediately. Some of them have even started talking about what happens if Trump refuses to resign and the impeachment process gets bogged down in procedural fights and Senate delays. That is where the 25th Amendment discussion comes back in. If the vice president and a majority of the cabinet were to declare Trump unable to discharge his duties, the process would be much faster than impeachment. There would be no lengthy trial in the Senate, no need for a two-thirds vote. The vice president would become acting president immediately, and Congress would have a limited time to resolve any disputes. That scenario is highly unlikely, given that Trump handpicked his cabinet and his vice president. These are loyalists who owe their positions to him. The idea that they would turn on him and invoke the 25th Amendment is far-fetched. But the fact that lawmakers are even discussing it, that they are putting the idea into the public conversation, changes the political dynamics. It normalizes the idea that Trump's conduct is so extreme that extraordinary measures are warranted. It creates an atmosphere where resignation starts to look like a viable option, a way for Trump to save face and avoid the humiliation of being the first president removed from office. The coming days and weeks are going to be critical. House leadership has to decide whether to bring the impeachment articles to a vote. The calls for resignation are going to get louder. The pressure on Republican senators is going to intensify. And Trump himself is going to have to decide how to respond. Does he lash out and make things worse? Does he try to negotiate some kind of exit? Does he dig in and dare Congress to remove him? Nobody knows yet, but everyone is watching. Let me bring this all together now, because what we are witnessing is unlike anything the country has seen since the darkest days of Watergate. The comparison is unavoidable, and it is one that historians are already making. Richard Nixon faced articles of impeachment for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and contempt of Congress. He resigned before the full House could vote because he knew he had lost the support of his own party. The parallels to today are striking, but there are also crucial differences that make this moment potentially even more significant. Nixon's impeachment articles were 3 in number. 3 categories of alleged misconduct that ultimately drove him from office. What is sitting in Congress right now against Trump is much more extensive. 7 articles in one resolution, plus a separate resolution focused on war powers. The scope is broader. The documented evidence is more voluminous, and unlike Nixon, who faced a Congress controlled by the opposing party, Trump is dealing with a legislative branch where Democrats hold significant power, and Republicans are showing the first cracks in their previously unified defense of the president. Let me address the question that everyone is asking. Can this actually succeed? Can Congress actually remove Donald Trump from office before his term ends? The honest answer is that the odds are still against it, but they are better than they have ever been. The political landscape has shifted in ways that no one predicted. Over 100 lawmakers going public with demands for resignation changes the calculation. It creates momentum that is hard to stop once it starts building. The process would unfold in several stages. First, the House Judiciary Committee would hold hearings on the impeachment articles. They would call witnesses, gather evidence, and produce a report recommending whether the full House should vote on impeachment. That process could take weeks or months, depending on how aggressively the committee moves. Then, the full House would vote. A simple majority is all that is required to impeach, to send the articles to the Senate for trial. Given the number of Democrats in the House and the growing number of Republicans who have expressed concerns about Trump's conduct, it is entirely possible that the House would vote to impeach. Then comes the Senate trial. This is where the real fight would happen. The Senate would sit as a jury, with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presiding. House members would act as prosecutors presenting the case against Trump. Trump's lawyers would present his defense. Senators would listen to the evidence and then vote on whether to convict and remove the president from office. Conviction requires a 2/3 vote, 67 senators. Right now, Democrats control fewer than 50 seats. That means they would need every single Democrat to vote for conviction, which is not guaranteed, plus at least 17 Republicans. 17 Republicans is a very high bar. Most Republican senators have tied their political futures to Trump. They fear his base and his ability to primary anyone who crosses him. But the impeachment articles are so comprehensive, the documented misconduct so extensive, that some Republicans might conclude that defending Trump is no longer politically viable. They might decide that a clean break is better than being dragged down with a sinking ship. The pressure on those 17 potential Republican votes is going to be immense. Every day that passes brings new headlines, new revelations, new calls for accountability. The constituents back home are watching. The donors are watching. The historians who will write about this moment are watching. Some senators might calculate that voting to convict Trump is actually the safer political move, that defending him will look terrible in retrospect, that being on the right side of history has value beyond the next election. Then there is the 25th Amendment option, which remains a long shot, but is no longer being dismissed as impossible. If the vice president and a majority of the cabinet were to declare Trump unable to discharge his duties, he would be removed immediately. That scenario requires people who owe their positions to Trump to turn against him. It seems unlikely, but so did everything else that has happened in the past few years. The unthinkable has become routine. The impossible has happened over and over again. Nobody should assume that the 25th Amendment will never be invoked simply because it has never been invoked before. The political damage to Trump is already done, regardless of whether removal actually happens. Over 100 members of Congress have gone on record calling for his resignation. The impeachment articles are filed and public. The allegations are documented and specific. Even if Trump serves out his full term, even if he avoids removal, this moment will follow him for the rest of his life. He will always be the president who faced the most comprehensive impeachment case in American history. He will always be the president whose own Congress demanded his resignation. That stain does not wash off. The impact on Trump's legacy is incalculable. He has spent his entire political career cultivating an image of strength and dominance. He has presented himself as a fighter who never backs down. But the historical record will show that more than 100 elected representatives of the American people looked at his conduct and concluded that he was unfit to serve. That is not a partisan talking point. That is a documented fact. The resolutions exist. The votes will be recorded. The statements will be preserved. For the country as a whole, this moment forces a reckoning with fundamental questions about the nature of democracy and the limits of executive power. If a president can do everything Trump is accused of doing and face no consequences, then what are the rules for? If the impeachment power exists on paper but is never used because it is too politically difficult, then the Constitution has failed. The founders designed impeachment as the ultimate check on presidential misconduct. They put it in the document because they understood that elections alone are not enough to protect democracy. Sometimes a president has to be removed before the next election cycle. Sometimes the threat is too urgent to wait. That is the argument that the lawmakers calling for resignation are making. They are saying that Trump poses an immediate danger to the constitutional order. They are saying that waiting is not acceptable. They are saying that the checks and balances the founders built into the system have to be used when the checks are needed, not when it is convenient, not when it is politically safe, when it is necessary. The next few weeks are going to be defining ones for American democracy. House leadership has to decide whether to move forward with impeachment votes. The pressure from the rank and file is intense and growing. Lawmakers who have been hesitant to support impeachment are facing calls from their constituents to take a stand. Town halls are getting heated. Phone lines are ringing off the hook. The grassroots energy behind the impeachment push is real, and it is not going away. Trump's response to all of this will also shape the outcome. If he lashes out, attacks the lawmakers calling for his resignation, doubles down on the conduct that triggered this crisis, he could make things worse for himself. He could drive even more Republicans to conclude that enough is enough. On the other hand, if he shows contrition, if he changes his behavior, if he tries to de-escalate, he might convince some lawmakers to back off. But Trump has never been good at de-escalation. His instinct is always to fight, to attack, to double down. That instinct has served him well politically, but it might be the thing that finally brings him down. Here is the bottom line. We are watching history unfold. The most comprehensive impeachment case ever filed against a sitting president is sitting in Congress right now. More than 100 lawmakers have publicly demanded that the president resign. The 25th Amendment is being discussed as a serious option, and the fundamental question of whether any president is truly above the law is being tested in real time. Whatever happens next, nothing will ever be the same. The country has crossed a threshold, and there is no going back.